10th or right after Simon defends, I'm leaving town, and I know I'm away the 10th of April, like right before tax day.
How do you find out the link?
April 29th to May 2nd.
It'll be on
That should be good.
CVEX.
That should be good.
So we go.
Okay. Probably somewhere in that
Yeah,
weekend.
I don't need to
Okay.
do that right now. You too.
Yeah.
So
If you guys want, I do have the table of contents.
Actually, I need it.
Like a picture. I can
Bring
just-
it this way!
I can give you my table of
Just because I
contents.
really do actually have to.
I didn't reprint.
I could have printed you a copy.
Yeah, I know. But there's only so many trees I can kill.
Yeah, I was very sad that they didn't give me the option
I thought
to
there was
do
gonna be like a lot
double-sided
more steps to it.
when I was printing.
No. Oh, the steps are all to prevent OBS from betraying you. That's really it. OBS will forget the microphone, it will forget the camera. So if you can see it, if you do a sound test and it's good, then you're.
And it's good.
Yeah, it can still betray it, but probably not today.
Okay.
It'll like at
Okay,
least
there we go.
I think today we're good.
Today we're good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Taya, the live stream's up. The link is on your email.
Awesome. Thank you.
And we are live streaming, so don't say anything you might regret.
Oh, I
Not
always
looking at
do.
you in particular.
Thank you, thank you. I always do.
Yeah, me too. Later. Later.
Do you want to read through the abstract?
Let me see the abstract.
So I send this link to all of my different places.
We'll start with that, and then I'll ask some questions.
Okay.
Going to Chicago, going to Champaign, going to Penn State.
Did you say Chicago?
Chicago.
You did say Chicago. I clocked it and I was gonna make a joke about it, but then I let it
I
go.
had cheese it in my mouth. Leave me alone.
Chicago.
Chicago.
I'm okay. I'm here. I need to eat. I need to take a nap. I need to finish up home. I'd rather jump off a cliff. So, yum.
There's a chair.
Tasty, yum.
Nobody's sitting in the middle.
Sorry, we're done.
Okay, here comes Judy.
Does anybody have, excuse me, what? Okay. Gum. Nothing. But no, I don't have any gum. This is fun.
Am I supposed to sit by you?
Yes, the
I'm live
the
streaming.
committee
to my phone.
the committee assembles here. Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to help celebrate the accomplishment of Teya. I'm Allison, and y'all know Judy, and I think some of you know our third committee member.
I'm Jacob Jumpton and I teach playwriting way over in the other building.
And if you can, please take a class from
Please.
Jacob. For those of you who are not aware of the procedure here, this is a celebration, a public acknowledgement of the work that Teya has done over the last 3 years. I can't believe how fast this has gone by. We are here to celebrate a manuscript that has been a long time in coming. And the general way these thesis defenses go is that I ask the MFA candidate, in this case Teya, to read an abstract about the manuscript, about the genesis of this manuscript. And as thesis advisor, I'll start off with a couple questions, and we'll have questions from the other members of the committee if there's any time left. This is about an hour and a half. This is not a long thing. If we have any time left, we'll have questions from your cohorts, from your fellow MFA candidates, and then we'll do a concluding statement, anything you want to say about where you hope to go next with your work. So why don't you start with the abstract?
Okay. So this poetry collection has been an endeavor of self-healing. I struggled for a long time trying to decide what I wanted my thesis manuscript to be. During my second year at SIU, I finally completed the restoration process of my teeth from an accident that happened when I was 10. Every poem I wrote during that time related to my accident and multiple surgeries. I knew that it would be difficult for me to move on from those experiences if I didn't face them head on. This collection explores the pain from all those years that I refused to acknowledge. It's less a memoir for other people to share my pain and more of a celebration that I made it through those trials and am still healing. When writing this manuscript, I was inspired by poets like Leila Chadi, Anna Leigh Knowles, and Gillian Weiss. I read collection after collection of poetry dealing with medical trauma. Most only showed me what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to blame the medical system. Many of the doctors helping with my recovery were just doing their jobs the best way they knew how. I do want to thank with all my heart my family who supported me throughout the years, throughout each surgery, through college, and then grad school. I also want to thank all of my teachers, Christine Butterworth McDermott, who first brought me into the world of creative writing, Dr. Sarah Henning, who helped me make it to grad school, Judy Jordan, who helped me make some edits to my writing and improve my similes, and Allison Joseph, who helped me turn a bunch of random poems full of pain into a manuscript that I am proud of. I also want to thank Jacob because he is willing to be here and
I'm a warm body.
and you've helped me with my playwriting, even if playwriting isn't what we're talking about right now. And I also want to thank my cohort and all of the friends who've given me advice and support throughout the years, because I honestly wouldn't be here without every single one of you guys.
So we're going to start with a question that your abstract sort of points us towards, which is, there is a lot of medical trauma memoir. That's a whole genre in and of itself. You spoke a little bit about some of the books of poetry that you turn to in order to think or conceptualize this project. Why poetry? Why not just jump on the bandwagon and write another book about in prose. What does poetry, what is added to this manuscript being poetry rather than prose?
I think, honestly, like, the lyricism is one of the things. I mean, I came to grad school to improve my poetry because I did prose for undergrad, and so I didn't want to overload myself with trying to be, like, very precise in terms of here's what happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. I wanted to, and I was trying to do that when I first started creating this manuscript. I was thinking about going chronologically, and then this happened, and then this happened. But then the more we worked on it, the more I was like, I want this to be a story, but I don't want it to be something that people, like, because I have other works that I want to bring in, and if I did a memoir, then I would have to bring in a whole bunch of other things rather than just the pain. And I wanted this to just be about the medical trauma and not about anything else. And so that's what I tried making it do.
So in terms of audience, you're thinking of primarily yourself as audience first before you speak to anybody else's conditions with chronic pain and chronic illness.
Yeah, I wrote this manuscript for myself because throughout the 13 years and 36 days from the initial accident to when I finally got in my permanent implants, I didn't admit how much I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And so after I finally was done and I was having therapy, I was going through therapy, I was talking to my therapist about all of these things, I was living on my own for the first time, I was like, no, I need to start going through this healing process, otherwise I'm going to just keep being stuck in the past. And there's other things that I need to heal from. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to take this one step at a time. First, we're going to heal from the physical trauma, and then we're going to move on to the other things as well. So
here's where things get sticky, because poets are often accused of being self-centered. We only write about our own pain. We only are concerned with our very small lives. How do you negotiate between, being true to what actually happened to you and making it poetry that is not merely, we're all accused as poets of navel-gazing, just putting our biography. I know you're very interested in myth. So how does that play into myth and story? How does that play into how you presented this material?
Well, I felt like there were two questions in that. So,
Yes, two questions.
Yeah, because there's the myth and story, and then there's the how do I make it more like where it talks about other people.
Both of those questions are connected.
So the myth the myth I didn't really push too hard in this one because I was trying to focus more on the body horror, and unfortunately there are people get in accidents every day, and
True.
everyone has pain, and a lot of people feel alone. I felt so alone when I was dealing with my stuff because I was the only one that I knew that was my age that was dealing with things like that. And so I wanted to write this as well as to sort of be like another person, I have experienced pain, but I've experienced in a different way than other people, because I noticed a lot of poetic memoirs and stuff, a lot of it is about cancer, and so Gillian Weiss, she talks about her amputation, her leg amputation, and it's lower body. Leila Chatty's Deluge is all about the bleeding of the womb, and so I'm like, but no, I've not really seen anybody that talks about the face in terms of like being pain. I mean, Lucy Gray, her her memoir did that,
Yeah,
and that was
really, yeah.
really great memoir. But I was like, no, I've not seen anybody that does it in a poetic form.
Right.
And you know, dental pain is so real. So many people are scared of dentists, and I don't want this to like make people more scared of dentists.
You know, it really
But-
does do that.
I know it does.
Does a
But-
really good job of.
I mean,
I was about to schedule an appointment, read this.
Yeah,
I'm just teasing you, hon.
no. There are good dentists out there. I have been very fortunate to know quite a few, and there are bad dentists out there. It's just like everybody's. And so I just wanted to open it up and have another experience for people to be like, oh, I've gone through that, because there are a lot of people out there that have gone through really horrific dental experiences, and I figure I might as well write about mine to see if to help them, see if they know that they're not alone, even if it is in poetic format, and a lot of people don't read that nowadays.
But there are a lot of books about very personal experiences. There are a lot of books about, unfortunately, about SA. There are a lot of books about generational trauma. This trauma is described in this book is so centralized, you know, in the mouth and in the face and in the body. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, is that risky being so very different, even amongst poets who do write about, you know, things like rape or sexual assault, or you're talking about something really very primal.
I don't think it's risky, because even if other people don't like it, right? I mean, ultimately, who are we writing our stuff for? Ourselves. Like if I've seen it so many times where they're like, oh, if you want a story, if you want to read a story, write it yourself. Like, if you want to read this type of thing. And so some people, a lot of people probably will not like this thesis because of the stuff that it talks about, because of the body horror, because of the gore. But it'll find its audience, and even if its audience is only a couple of people, that's still better than not having anything, than it not being written on the page and still staying inside me.
Can you define for people that term body horror?
So
And maybe point to a poem in the manuscript that illustrates body horror for folks, just in case you're like, what is body horror? I know what horror is, I know what body is, but this seems awfully personal.
I have so many about
I know you do.
body horror.
I know you do. It's like the whole book, but
Okay, we'll do this. So body horror to me is more like gore, but just like very not like the overly like splashy gore that you see in like thriller movies and stuff. It's like that subtle thing where you're just talking about the things that the body does that are really gross, but are like it just like
what poem are you going to read to demonstrate that concept for us?
The poem that I'm going to read is The Best Way to Make Yourself Bleed. I figured that has a good amount of like some body horror. I have so many poems.
Right.
So, the best way to make yourself bleed. Rip holes in your flesh that were patched the day before. Dab toilet paper on blood released from mindlessly picked scabs. Pin-pricked holes litter your body from mountains of dead skin. Scrape them away. Be surprised when each one bleeds. Tongue blank expanses in your mouth. Gaping holes where wisdom teeth once smuggled safely beneath your gums. Saltwater rinses sequestered food away, but never stop pushing against the sensitive skin whenever you can. That is pain we control. Lean over the white bathroom sink. Drip, green infection like drizzling rain from your mouth as you tear at the swollen red flesh and black sutures. Push against the ooze. Paint your fingers with thick blood and streams of piss-colored pus.
Yeah, that's horrific. But it's also elegant. So can you talk about the role of form, not necessarily strict poetic form, but what you do formally as a poet to corral this body horror, these horrible things that you're writing about?
I try to focus a lot on sound. That's one of the things that we worked on a lot in Judy's workshops, especially, is trying to get that sound moving throughout the poem. And so a lot of the times I try to work on, okay, so I want this to be gross, but I also want it to sound like have a good mouthfeel.
Yeah, so there's the irony. You want it to depict visually something that is appalling, but you want it to sonically sound good.
Yeah. With like alliteration and things like that.
And that's a difficult task to maintain throughout an entire manuscript, because the thing would be to, well, if I'm writing these poems about this horrific thing that's been visited upon my body, the poems might, the imitative fallacy, that the poems themselves might become horrific. But you never do that. What poem would you point to in this manuscript of all these horrible things, subject-wise? What poem would you point to say to people, hey, here, look at how I can throw down sonically, look at my craft? Which poem in here would you point to people to say, look, I'm a badass poet. I'm writing about these terrible things. I'm writing about horrible things, body horror, gore, blood, pus. But what poem would you point to say, yeah, this should be poetry. This should be verse? Which is a hard question for you because you're a modest person, but
It's a very hard question for me.
I want you to sing your own praises for a little bit.
Can this just kind of be like my favorite poem too?
Well, it might be your favorite poem. We all have poems that we can never wrangle to the page, and then we have some poems where we look at and we go, I did the thing. So what poem in here, despite the subject matter being as horrific as it is, what poem in here makes you say, I did the thing?
Okay. I'm waffling between the titular poem and In a Split Second.
Well, read In a Split Second first, and then we'll circle back to the title poem, and how you arrived at the title poem is my next question.
In a split second. No one ever died from a broken, bloodied mouth, only a shattered skull, seething cerebrum. I was 3 inches too tall to die from a broken crown. I envy those with visible wounds. Shark attacks create etched bite marks and devoured limbs. Car accidents adorned glass and casts and tourniquets. Lightning strikes unlikely to survive. Electrified burns and healed white branches beautiful against the skin. Darkness makes injuries appear softer, hiding in dim light, shadows curling around thick scars like scarves, caressing fused fissures. I forget in the dark, scars fester, suffocating on stale carbon dioxide, forgotten like a book you open once. I thought I was going to die. That luxury wasn't mine. Just pain, a throbbing echo staining my bones. Sometimes I wish for worse, that for 13 years I'd have more to show than the hole covered by dentures. I need something that will show the bleeding from the wound inside that has been seeping for 13 years. Even now, with a scar long as my hand, wire thick, the reminder of more of my body being displaced. That scar isn't presented to the world. Even with a cadaver's bone disintegrating, rejected by my body, even with the fear of cancerous tissues from x-rays eating me whole, even finished, my new porcelain teeth next to a tooth that started popping, pushed back in place with each bite.
Yeah, that is a pretty elegant poem given the horrific thing it describes. We'll move on to the title poem because we had a lot of difficulty deciding what we were going to call this.
We did, yeah.
So talk about arriving at the title and then read the title poem. The whole issue of walking around with somebody else's bone.
Yeah, so at first I thought about doing the title as Definition of Fear because that's one of those that's a repeated title of poems throughout my collection. And then I think we were trying to decide, Scar Scene, I think, was another one that we were thinking about. And then the poem Between My Body and the Cadaver Inside That Isn't Mine is a poem that first began as like 4 different poems, and then when I went into revising those poems, I was like, okay, basically these are all doing something, but they don't feel like they can like fully stand by themselves as poems by themselves, and so then I like put them into sections, into this bigger piece, and then came up with the Between My Body and the Cadaver Inside That Isn't Mine, and I took that to workshop and then added even more sections after workshop, and then I arrived on, then we were thinking about that being the title of the poem, and so I really liked that, but I liked having cut out the That Isn't Mine, because that's the title of a poem, but I just have Between My Body and the Cadaver Inside because as the title of the manuscript, because I feel like that plays a lot with the different themes that I have, because I do talk about the cadaver that's inside of me that my body rejected, and then that made me have to do the hip graft surgery. But I also talk a lot about my like internal struggles with me and myself and the younger version of me, and so having the multiple layers of the cadaver, I thought that was kind of fun, because you have the one that's not me, but then you have the cadaver that is me and the cadaver that was my younger self and stuff like that.
Can you read that poem, please?
Yes, I can.
I know it's an epic, so take your time.
Yeah, it is. It is a.
But it's when we assembled this manuscript, we talked about having tentpole poems, poems that sort of pull the whole thing together, and this is a tentpole poem.
Okay, so Between My Body and the Cadaver Inside That Isn't Mine. Section 1. I picture my surgeon combing a cemetery for the perfect scrap of bone to shave piece by piece to shove in my mouth, jigsaw puzzle forever askew. When he finds his victim, he digs, silent shovel, simple routine, body uncovered, bugs whirl inside, disintegrating crevices. He chips at the skeleton, sculptor carving figures into stone. Peels away decayed flesh clinging to dirt powdered bone. Section 2. I absorbed it after 3 months, too early for the cadaver to help regenerate my bones. Does bone work the same as skin? Cells regenerating every 7 years? If so, the cadaver ghost isn't allowed to leave me. Part of me now, I won't let it escape. The cadaver can yell at me to care for the area where its precious bit of body lies. The body doesn't exist there anymore. I'll never listen to the ghost inside. Section 3. Was it a hip, a jaw, maybe it was the femur my surgeon grabbed from the hospital, brought to his office normally for standard wisdom teeth removals. Maybe he had to grab the thinnest bone, quickly close me up. I was waking up. I could see his Tusken Raider looking face, peering over me, telling me to calm down. Second wave of anesthesia took me surfing through desert canyons full of twists and turns. Burnt umber and pale pink sand crashed over me in waves. I was buried but still dragged through the pulls and pushes. I was free, bursting through the sand, sobbing, no longer recognizing me where I belonged. The desert wind peeled my skin, broke my bones, and remade me in its image. Section 4. I scream at her, that new owner of mine. She stares in the mirror and cries, her face swollen like a rotting cantaloupe. I hate her. Each chance I get, I pull at my bone. that sliver that never belonged to her. Last wishes be damned, she can suffer more. Section 5. No longer Teya. I am now Teya plus an unknown person. I never learned that equation in math. Equations I was shown. Doctors plus bone equals healthy surgery. Bone plus me equals fixed smile. Equations I experienced. Anesthesia times time divided by weight equals waking up halfway through. Genetics plus foreign object subtracted by absorbing times 3 months equals dead, green eyes staring back, unflinching like unpolished moss agate. Section 6. I hear wailing inside as this person I now hold becomes a forgotten memory to only exist absorbed by me for the rest of eternity. Section 7. Listen to me. I hate you. I made it so you couldn't use my bone. I didn't want to become part of you. You could never handle me. The tears you cried soaked through my bone and turned my warmth into frigid cold. Section 8. The cadaver will never have a name. Giving one might resurrect it. In life, I never knew it. In death, it failed me. Section 9. How does it feel to be split into pieces, more apart than together? How does it feel to know my body rejected you? Your cadaver wasn't good enough. I wasn't weak enough to accept you. We only had 3 months before I killed you again. Do you know the pain that caused? I hope you cried with each step I couldn't take after the next surgery. Oak tree chiseled, missing half her branches.
Ooh. I find that poem pretty profound, and it hits on one of Judy's, when you scratch Judy, she loves that imagination. So the beginning of the poem, where you have the doctor literally harvesting bone and trying to find the right bone, is such an imaginative thing. I never would have thought of that. I've had similar, not anywhere near as extensive, but I think we all think of those opportunities, and we let a lot of as creative people, we let a lot of opportunities pass by in terms of depicting such things. We always think, oh, I went to the doctor, I can't write about that. So, Judy, what do you think about the imagination that's going on in this book?
What I mean, if we're talking about that specific poem, what I really loved was the idea that cadaver is, the dead person is saying, hey, what, don't I get some say in this? That was my favorite part as far as imagination goes. I don't know that I would have thought to go there, so I was impressed by that. That's there's a lot of the endings really land in a very imaginative way. Like there's one where the blood is blooming, the blood is blooming, I think is the final image. So I mean, there's a number of places where that happens.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about Judy's quadrants, and how, if this is not going to be directly biographical the way someone might expect a book like this to be, there's very little mention of, in your abstract you mentioned thanking family, but family as a presence is not emphasized here, and that was a deliberate choice on your part. So can you talk about subverting that expectation? You do mention from time to time family, but they're not the focus. So can you talk about subverting that expectation that someone might find that as a flaw?
Well, I didn't want to bring too much of my family into this collection because there's so much that I could talk about in terms of family, even from like dealing with this. But, you know, this mostly happened when I was growing up, and so then if I brought in more family things of when I was growing up, then it would turn into a completely different thesis, and I want to have either a chapbook or a whole separate manuscript where I do talk about my childhood and the things me and my sisters went through and put each other through and stuff like that, because I've discovered in writing this thesis, it's been very helpful in terms of a healing process, of writing down my pain and turning it into a bunch of poems that turning into things that sound good, that feel good, that look good. It's very therapeutic, especially because then when I have, like, when I write poems that are really hard for me to write, then I can go to my therapist and be like, here, read this poem. This is what I was going through last week.
But you do have in section 3 a poem that is directly
Yes.
to the parents. So
I think I have 2 in section 3
Yeah.
that are more towards the parents.
yeah, you have a letter to my parents on page 57.
And then I have an interrogation, I think.
Could you read one, either one? Because I think that's something that when this manuscript gets circulating, that's something someone's going to ask you about, like why? Because the expectation is that, you know, this is a child through this process.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
A letter to my parents. All we knew was each other. Mom, too mired in her pain, drowning in the drilling of her brain from chronic migraines. Dad, too busy working to communicate. My sisters and I became 3 ghosts, afraid to tiptoe around, socks whisper slipping, collecting dust from the lacquered wood floor. We would stand at your bedroom door, praying for it to open before your pain seeped out. We took those short tempers and sharp tones that slithered under your door, twisted them, turning them on each other in the form of crushed hands, branch bruises, and hoarse throats peppered with cayenne. As adults, we stayed quiet about the repercussions your demand for silence had on us. We never bared how the stain of your relationship bled through to our own. Only when we left, hundreds of miles stretching between, each mile like a string untangling, allowing us to breathe again like the first gasp of air after breaching the surface where we drowned. I wrote this poem before my parents got divorced.
Right.
I wrote this one in my 2nd year here. And then the other poem that I have towards my parents was written after their divorce.
Is there a distinction in your mind between the 2 poems because of that event?
No, I think the letter to my parents is mainly about just me being like, hey, you guys were like, this is what we felt as kids, and it wasn't until we grew up and learned and got better at seeing and paying attention to the world around us that we were finally able to look back and be like, oh, things were not the best.
Right.
And I mean, like, my parents, they did their best.
Yeah.
They did a decent job, but
Yeah.
like with every family, there are issues.
Right.
And
So that's a way in. It's really easy to put this book, because it's so body centered, in the tradition of confessionalist poetry, and we think about people like Sexton and Plath and everybody airing their dirty laundry from the 1960s on, Robert Lowell, people like that. But you seem to be resisting confessionalism a little bit in the fact that you're not bringing the family into it, but you are accepting one of the tenets of confessional poetry, which is the confrontation with the self, which is something that is continually happening throughout the book. And toward the end of the book, toward the end of the manuscript, the speaker finally gets an outlet in terms of not medical therapy, but psychological therapy. So can you talk about the poems that, when I tell my therapist I hate myself, this is at the end of the book, which
Can we-
is,
Can we talk a little bit more about the family poems?
you knew she was going to go there. We'll do that right after she talks about the therapy poem.
I was gonna agree with you.
Go ahead and read that, and then we'll go back to this issue of family.
Oh, what page is the?
That's on
therapy?
page 70.
70. And this is a poem that I took to a workshop, and then I took to my therapist and was like, here. And then he was like, thank you for being honest with me, Teya. And I'm like, you're welcome. So, what I say when I tell my therapist I hate myself. I have a cage around me, rusted and creaking, wires, barbed skin, piercing, coagulated blood cement this contraption I built as a child, welded and contained with each new injury. The torch blinded, the sparks ignited hair, scorching me to the bone, leaving me a skeleton. The cage was home until it became a trap, a prison, a steel labyrinth, pitfall and caltrop filled. What would they say after seeing the scorched bones, melting muscles and tendons growing back, centimeters of flesh restoring in minutes? Never will I have a perfect restoration, an antique left in a moldy attic requiring breaking before healing. My bleeding body exists in the darkness I created. I'm too afraid to reveal myself outside the cage. I've been breaking too long for time to heal me. Years of darkness and festering wounds gaping like maws on a raging shark ruined me. There I will stay, rattling the bars, screaming until my vocal cords shrivel from flames vining through this prison of my own making.
I can't imagine giving that. That's such an intense poem. I can't imagine. If I were the therapist, I was like, okay, am I upping her doses? Or what? You know, are we switching? But back to the notion of, you know, how much family to have.
Oh, I was going to say Lucy Gridley. You mentioned her memoir earlier. She doesn't have hardly any family in that memoir because when she had the injury at the age of 10, earlier in the book she mentions that she's going in for her first overnight hospital visit, and her parents sort of look at her in total fear and walk out, and she says, "I realize I'm alone."
Mm-hmm.
But also there's a couple of family poems that I found interesting because one of them, at the end, the mother smiles, but it's not directly said, but I get the feeling from the poem she's making these delicious homemade cinnamon rolls.
We need to talk about the cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, and from what I get from the poem, the speaker, the subject of the poem, has recently had an operation and cannot eat the cinnamon rolls.
Mm-hmm.
So she's just going to have to suffer through everyone else eating the cinnamon rolls. And then there's another poem with cinnamon rolls, which the speaker is, she's sneaking the raw dough and sucking on it because that's all she can do.
Gumming it, yeah.
So those family poems do come up, and you know, I don't want to say, you know, obviously the mother has to feed the other children, but still, it's one of those things like when you're a child, this one thing that happens that just seems like such a big deal, and it just haunts you for the rest of your life. Like you made these delicious homemade cinnamon rolls with nuts and dates and everything, and then I couldn't even eat it, and I had to sit there and watch everybody else eat.
Things like that do keep with you. The poem, I was 8 years old and Mom is singing, that one, I could eat the cinnamon rolls in that poem. But the
52, that's the cinnamon roll poem that, you know, damages one's soul.
yeah, there's bitterness, and then I think cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, cinnamon rolls, that's on page
is the,
52. That's
those
the one
both
where
are ones that I
the
can't.
speaker is gumming the cinnamon rolls.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because cinnamon rolls are such a, you know, comforting and homey food, particularly if someone has homemade them for you. So can you talk about, because it pops up, you know, all these times in the book.
That used to be a family tradition where every April and October, for General Conference when we still went to church, we would make cinnamon rolls. We had, you know, a family recipe of the rolls, and we would just, you know, make them together with Mom and everyone. But a lot of the times, like there were quite a few times when we would be waking up, like this also ties into the ghosts, where we would wake up and we would have to be quiet because mom had a migraine and dad was gone, and so we entertained ourselves a lot growing up, and but not like being on a liquid soft food diet for 4 months is hell. Especially as a 10-year-old. And like I still remember there was one day like my dad brought home pizza because he was craving pizza. He missed pizza so much, and pizza was one of my favorite foods, and for the longest time I thought that he had just forgotten that I couldn't eat the pizza. And so like he felt real bad, like he made me a shake, like he blended up the pizza with some tomato soup. Doesn't do it. That's not pizza. And then I was talking to my mom about it a while ago, and she was like, no, Teya, he didn't forget, he just really wanted pizza. And so he just blended you up a slice because he just wanted to eat it. So yeah, no, I love cinnamon rolls, but for the longest time, like they were just this thing, because we made them in April, and I had 4 months of not being able to eat anything. I couldn't eat my Christmas candy. I couldn't eat Christmas breakfast or dinner, and so by the time we rolled around to April and we were making cinnamon rolls, I was just dismayed. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was like, I need to be able to chew. And then like 2 weeks later, I was able to chew again, which was nice. But
So this is one of the motifs, the cinnamon rolls. Can you talk about some other reoccurring images or motifs throughout the manuscript that are intentional?
One of the reoccurring ones is this feeling of being used to pain and being so used to pain that it now becomes like a requirement throughout daily life. Another one is a lot of decay and rot and stuff, because none of my wounds have ever gotten infected, but that's always just like, as a young kid, seeing my lips all scabbed and everything, it leaves an impression, and then you feel like that's just all you have left inside of you is just this decay. And then when you bring in depression into it too, and anxiety, and it feels like you're just rotting on the inside. And so I brought that in a lot in terms of just feeling like I was rotting and dying on the inside.
There's another one that's tangentially related to what you just said, but that's the image of death itself.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk, because you've got death knocking on closed doors, you've got death in song, you've got idyllic death. The speaker survives. There is not an actual literal death, but death keeps popping up and popping up. So can you talk about, or even read one of the poems that specifically, lyricize death?
Yeah. So I was a very injured child. I injured myself quite often as a kid, and I was sick a lot too. I was never hospitalized, but there was always this, I was constantly sick. And I never really thought fully about death until my cadaver graft, when I woke up in the middle of the surgery, and the reason I woke up was because my doctor couldn't keep me down while also keeping me breathing.
Yikes.
He couldn't give me the amount of pain medication that I needed in order to stay breathing, and that's one of the reasons why we did the hip graft and the implant surgeries in the hospital, was so he could keep me out throughout the entire process while also keeping me breathing. And so then after that, I was just like, there's all of these things, and then I look through my life, and I'm like, if one thing happened, I wouldn't, like, if one thing, like, just was a little bit different, I wouldn't be here. Like, I would be dead. And, so, yeah. I think we're gonna do Death in Song.
Okay.
Because I wrote this one in one of Judy's classes, and I can't remember what the prompt was, but it was more just like do leaps, and then do like have this stanza be this, and this stanza be this, and I was like, okay, and this is, yeah, I like this poem. So, Death in Song. I sang soprano in my high school choir until I was turned to an alto, taking away notes that let me feel like I was a god, a fierce chanteuse beckoning the coming of Ragnarok. Bees dive-bombed the pool party, popped soda like sweet pools of spider silk. The squawking teenage girls were like sorority sisters in a horror movie, white and blonde as radioactive Barbies. Loki winked and absconded with their purses after cakes turned skin violet, vivid like unripe juniper berries. The violet was not blue, but in fact death, an all-encompassing suffocation of the vocal cords, air seeping from lungs like a freshly blown and released balloon, saliva slick, gurgling. But I don't believe in death, only l'appel du vide. I said death because I meant the cold penetrating my skin as I stared at the empty pool, brown leaf and rotten trash filled, no longer echoing as my stone-cracked notes fell. Yeah. A lot of people in my family have died too, and so that's just like a thing. I think about death a lot.
Yeah, it's you would have to. Anyone who's gone through the medical trauma and the body horror that you explain in the book. Let me ask you about the definition of fear poems and what role that you see them playing. Can you describe? Each one is different, like formally different, but they're all trying to get at the same thing, like defining what fear is for the speaker of this book.
Yeah, I think 4 different definition of fear poems in here. One about sleep, one about the dark, one about pain, and one about silence.
Yeah, one in section 1, one in section 2, and then 2 in section 3.
And ever since undergrad, I've always been fascinated by definition poems after reading John McCartney's Scared Violent Like Horses. And so, like, I've just been trying to, like, write them and figure out how I want to do it and stuff. And then I wanted to have sort of like a linked poem, because I've read a lot of collections where they have poems that have the same title, but the content is different.
Right.
And I've been fascinated by those types of poems as well, because then it's like, oh, there's this one title that fits with everything, but then the content, changes. And so I wanted to play around with that, and I took a couple of these to workshops. And I was playing around with how I wanted each one to look, which part of a dictionary definition did I want each one to emulate? What did I want the words to be? What did I want it to be about? And things like that, because I'm afraid of a lot of things, so I could have had a lot more of those poems in here. But I really I liked that idea of these are things that I'm afraid of, that a lot of people are afraid of. And so here's how I'm going to define what they mean to me.
Paradoxically, they're kind of a relief because they are not engulfed in the body horror, the definition of fear poems, that you're kind of saying to your reader, okay, I have these really terrible things that have happened to my person, my body, somatically, and fear also functions for me the way it does for just about everybody else. Can you read one of them?
Yeah, sure. Which one do you want me to read?
Let's see, the one in the first section.
One in the first section.
It is on page 21.
Okay. Definition of fear. Silence, pronounced loneliness. Noun, often mistaken for a verb. 1. Stopped invitations. Silent friends unable to help her climb out of that trench where her emotions lay shackled to a crumbling dirt wall miles underground. Criminals forbidden to feel warm sun breezes on wafer-thin skin. 2. Eye of the hurricane. She drowned words under torrents of remembered be quiets, self-silencing. 3. Deleted messages. Notifications silent. Empty spaces are my remains.
Yeah, that's a poem that isn't necessarily different from what you might find in a book about anything, any other subject.
Mm-hmm.
Was that your specific thought with the definition of fear poems? I'm going to give people a chance to see the other things I'm afraid of.
Yeah, and I knew I needed breaks from the body horror, from the things, but I didn't want bringing in like other happy things would have felt completely like out of turn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, we're gonna have a break, but we're gonna stay in the same realm of fear and pain and stuff, but it's gonna give them like a little bit of a leeway before we tumble them back into the pit, type of a thing.
There's another layer that you could have included here that you decided not to, which is the layer of religion.
Yes.
And you decided to push that to the side for now and not incorporate it here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that decision?
So, I really wanted to, when I first came in, I thought that I was going, like one of my thesis ideas was about religious trauma and,
Mm-hmm.
Breaking away from the Mormon church and stuff like that. But I realized that in order to do that properly, in order to give the pain and the trauma and the things of from being part of that cult and that religion, I would need to go back in and refamiliarize refamiliarize myself with aspects of the Mormon church, so that I could do it due diligence in a poetic collection, and I really just didn't feel like suffering through that right now, and I wanted to be able to take my time, and so I didn't want, like, I've got some poems dealing with religion, but I figure that it's such a big concept that I feel like I should have another manuscript, or at the very least a chapbook regarding all of that information.
Because it is one way to couch the pain, this trauma, the suffering, because people, and Judy often talks about, you're in an elevator with an editor from Norton for 5 seconds, which would be a very short elevator ride. Let's give him 10 seconds. And, how are you going to describe this book? Because you want to be published by Norton, because they do good books. And that is a potential, religion is always a potential hook for publishers. But you have made the very astute, I think, decision not to. There are a lot of books out there that marry people's religious trauma to their physical trauma. I think treating them separately is going to allow you to really delve back into that particular aspect of your life. And the fact that this is pretty much entirely absent, that religion is pretty much entirely absent. It would be a very different book if you, coupled it with, you used the word cult. I did not.
I used to be a part of that religion, so I can say that. And, I think it also helps, too, that I stopped going to church. I left the church when I was 16. And a lot of my surgeries happened when I was, happened between the ages of 19 and 21. And so then I'd had 2 years of separation, and so then I was I'd gone to church with the initial accident, but then you know, after I was healed from that, people just kind of forgot about it in my church, and so then it just wasn't a thing, and so I never really had that intersection of the God and the physical pain, because to me they were almost always separate entities.
Okay. Judy, do you have some more questions?
I was going to say I'm disappointed to not learn more about the magic underwear.
Oh, I got sources for you. If anyone is interested in separating from the Mormon church, there's this YouTuber named Alyssa Grenfell. She's amazing, and I've learned more about Mormonism from her than I have from you.
I don't talk about it much because
Yeah.
you know I got out of it when I was young, so.
Yeah, so she'll tell you about the magic underwear. But questions about...
Oh, that stuff. Oh,
Yeah.
I could tell you about that stuff.
Yeah.
I know about that stuff.
There are a lot of people who have I'm not sure what the word is.
Deconstructed?
Yes. And a lot of them are making bank because it's a way to make money, to tell people how to get out of high demand religions.
Yeah.
Usually they're Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. Those are two groups I've seen people like doing videos about how I left this, and they use the word cult.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Jacob, did you have some questions?
I did. Well, first I wanted to just say what a pleasure it was to read this, even though the material, the subject rather, isn't terribly pleasurable. It was, I sat down to read it in a moment where I knew I couldn't get through the whole thing, and then I was really pissed at myself. I was like, I want to keep going. So it was and that doesn't happen with a lot of theses. So I was really excited that I didn't want to put it down. So I wanted to start with that.
Thank you.
I have some formal questions, not surprisingly.
Mm,
If you've
not
taken-
surprisingly.
If you've taken a playwriting class with me. I think one of the biggest question, I'll just say it, is I was really interested in your use of empty space, both on the page with enjambment, which I thought was really strong throughout. I mean, I've got marginalia that I'll send you, but I kept being like, this is a good one, this is a good one. So there was a lot of times the physical space I was interested in, but then there was, because I didn't know for sure this was autobiographical, it seemed like it, but I'm a good stand-in, I think, for someone who bought the Norton, right, and is just reading it. So I felt it, but I wasn't positive, and because I don't know from you this story, there was a lot of space in the narrative where I was trying to figure out what had happened, and because it's not in chronological order, because it's not told in this sort of memoir fashion, I was really interested in that space. And I have my opinions about both of those, but I was wondering if you could talk about those two types of space, and were you using them intentionally, and if so, to what end?
So, one of the reasons why I like doing space on the page, I like playing around with how it looks on the page. That's been something that I've liked doing since undergrad, and so doing really good like enjambments is something that I try hard to do, because even if like while I'm reading it out loud I don't hit that pause, I love having like, because when I'm reading poetry I love having a good like ending word that then like where you read just one line, it has like, it can be read a different way than if you just read the entire phrase. And so I really love those types of things, and so I tried doing that in this collection. And in terms of narrative space, where there's like space between, I was kind of like struggling between, okay, do I want to have, in some of these more narrative poems, do I want to put the age that I was in these to help sort of give the reader sort of like a guide map where there's like, okay, 8 years old, everything is fine, mom is singing, 10 years old, accident happens, stuff like, and I don't talk about my wisdom teeth surgery in this collection, because ultimately it was one of the better surgeries that I'd had, even though recovering from it still sucked. But I was recovering from my wisdom tooth surgery with my middle sister, who had had her wisdom teeth taken out at the same time, and so like that felt like more of a shared experience. And then the other surgeries that I had just happened back to back to back, because it was like, okay, we have the surgery, you're gonna have 6 months, we're gonna do an x-ray, and we're gonna have another one, just so that they could get everything in, so that the space in between my teeth didn't grow further. I also didn't talk about my 2 sets of braces in here, because while those sucked, it just, they didn't, like those types of experiences to me didn't have the same emotional impact as all of the other ones did. Like, braces suck. I could have written a poem or two about, there was one time when in high school I had the metal braces, and they just kind of wired the fake teeth onto the space in between my real teeth. And one time before a choir concert, like 30 minutes before a choir concert, I was brushing my teeth, and one of those teeth fell out into the sink. And so then I had to rush to my orthodontist to get it put back on before I could go to my choir concert, because if I didn't have that tooth in there, I couldn't properly enunciate the words that I was having to sing. And so like I could have put some of those in there, and maybe in my revisions that I do, I might add in something like 1 or 2 of those to bridge some of those spaces. But I think also having those spaces helps, because then it gives, I think it might give the reader a little bit more space to put in their own experiences, and to feel like to feel the words, and to feel the emotions and the pain, without having to necessarily figure out what order that the speaker that I had them in.
Yeah. I agree more with the second one. I thought the spaces were really effective. I mean, put whatever in you want in your visions, but for me the spaces accomplished a suspense, like as I was trying to figure it out, right? As I was trying to figure out, wait, where are we?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how's the accident happened in this poem? It seems like she can eat the cinnamon rolls here, like, you know. So that was a way it was kind of like a puzzle, and I think that was part of what was keeping me wanting to read it. And so space was my prepared question, and then you very helpfully said something. In the definition of fear poem you just read in part 1, you write, empty spaces are my remains. And I didn't pick up on that when I was reading that the first time. And so I think, intentional or not, the spaces you've left, and then with that sort of idea of space is what remains, I think is very clever.
That was
Intentional or not.
100% intentional.
Yeah, I figured it was.
I definitely did that on purpose.
But it's great. It's great.
Thank you.
The narrative question was my first question, actually, because at what point in the collection do you feel a reader will fully understand the medical history you are recounting? And obviously you made the choice to not make it clear from the beginning, but to have the reader piece it together gradually. So I was just wondering why you made that choice.
Because I like puzzles. And I mean, that's not the reason. The main reason is I didn't want to, when Allison and I were going through and creating this manuscript, when how we had first done it was Allison wanted me to send her all of the poems that I had that could potentially go into my thesis. And so I did, and then we went through and we figured out which ones were the tent poles, which ones were the tadpoles, the maypoles, like whether they were like the big emotionally hitting ones or the ones that kind of like helped keep the momentum going and stuff like that. And so once we figured out the ones, like those ones that would go into the manuscript, then we were looking at organizing it and figuring out how to organize it. And when we had like where we were like, okay, so we have this poem here and then this poem, let's give them a break for a second and then let's go to this poem of this type and stuff. And so then it just naturally turned out that it wasn't in chronological order because we wanted to keep like some threads going throughout the entire manuscript, and then I just kind of liked it not being in chronological because then I didn't have to be so anal about like time and place and stuff, which would have added a lot more footnotes to this thesis.
And one way of mediating that would be to have in the back, you know, some people have footnotes in the back, you know, to have a chronology of, ooh, this sounds awful, chronology of injury in the back as a sort of standalone thing that, you know, some readers are going to be really open to the space.
Right.
Some people are really going to be like, but what happened and why? And so a mediating strategy is to have that chronology in the back so it doesn't interfere with the poems. Because what you seem to be saying throughout this whole process is it didn't, you know when these things happen to you, but for this book it doesn't matter when these things happened, that they happened and that you are concentrating on exploring, you know, the very ugly underside of surgeries, of being in this sort of not fatal, but in a way, I would use the word lethal, because this is, you know, there's a lot of cringe, and that was something I wanted to ask you about, you know, the fear. We have a lot of people casually throw around the word cringe these days, you know, this, that, and the other is cringe, but there's a lot in this book that will make a reader literally physically flinch and cringe. How do you feel about putting work into the world that does that, and what is the purpose of making people, you know, cringe?
I like reading that like I like reading like things that are just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that would happen, and so
You like the cringe then?
I like the cringe. I like the gore. I like, you know, when I was in my undergrad, I wrote a lot of stuff. There was like a lot of like fight scenes and stuff like that my professors would be like, okay, the fight scenes are great, Teya. Everything else doesn't make sense, but the fight scenes are good. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I get that. And so, like, you know, it's just, I like the body horror. I watch extremely body, like lots of, like, gory things, and I laugh at them on TV. And so, but also I think some of the best works of art that I've ever seen, like, some of, like, the pieces, the books that have stayed with me are the ones that I cringe at, the ones where I'm like, oh,
yeah, it's like
and the ones that I cry at, like the ones that make me feel the emotions, that bring them out of me without me forcing them, is like, those are my favorite types of things to read. And so
it's like you're bringing cringe back to its original definition, that we've used it so sloppily and, you know, slang wise for, you know, the last 10 or so years. Like, oh, that's cringe. No, that's just tacky. You know, you're bringing it back to, you know, somatic, in the body, things that really make other people recoil.
For what it's worth, I didn't actually cringe that much, but there's one poem where I was just like, oh my God. It's the one where the surgeon is cutting out and pulling out the wires with no anesthesia. I was like, oh no, that's ridiculous. Why? Give this child some anesthesia.
oh, my mom was pissed at that dentist.
Your mom was yelling in that poem.
that was the last time we ever saw that dentist. But after that, I was able to eat. I was able to chew because I didn't have the brace in my face
Yeah, but
anymore.
anesthesia.
Yeah.
When they're pulling the wires through the gums, anesthesia.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, that dentist did not numb me at all. He was like, okay, we're doing this. And I was like, what are we doing? And then
I mean, you had insurance, right?
Yes.
I had an ex who broke her jaw, and she had the jaw wired up, and she didn't have insurance, so when she went to the hospital to get the wire took out, he said, well, you don't have insurance, so you don't get anesthesia. And he grabbed them with some wire cutters and just he literally braced his feet against the table with her in between his legs and pulled and sent her into shock. Sent her into like painful shock. And there was like 20 medical students watching the entire thing. And so I was like remembering that. And she also did the pizza thing in the blender, which is like the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my life. Other than
The texture is not pleasant.
I mean, the vegetables okay, maybe the meat okay, but not the crust. I'm like, oh. How are you doing this? This is disgusting. But yeah, that poem right there, that was the only one I was like, oh no, this guy needs to lose his medical license. No. But the rest of them, I was like, I mean, yeah, there's pain, but I mean, it's poetry. What do you want?
That's true.
Well, I did want to ask you about something you said in your abstract, which is a really interesting thing, that there's very little indictment of the medical establishment. There's very little anger towards there should be, maybe, but
Towards the people that deserve it.
Yeah. So why did you take that stance? Like, there are a lot of actually, local news is filled with cases of people who are mad at their doctors and they had no other recourse but to call, news channel, whatever, and get a piece done. Why did you, and I asked you, are you going to have, because there was a tension here that, between doctors and nurses, that the nurses are, throughout the text, bringing comfort and care, and the doctors are the ones ripping things apart. But you don't.
For the most part, the nurses are bringing comfort and care.
Yeah, you don't indict like medicine as a whole, or surgery as a whole. And is that because you're sort of fascinated by it at basis, at the heart of it all? You're kind of fascinated by it.
I am very fascinated by it, but I also, at the end, I visited my dentist and my oral surgeon so often that it just felt like they felt like friends, and they cared about me, and my oral surgeon, he felt real bad when he was doing the implant and capping, and I hated that operation. I pray to God that I never see him again. But I'm grateful that he put in the work that he did, because it was the team that I had in Katy of dentists and oral surgeons and orthodontists that helped me feel comfortable with my smile again, with my teeth again. Because for the longest time, it was like I would purposefully talk, I would purposefully like smile and stuff without showing my teeth, because I was like, no, I can't do this. And so while they did cause me a lot of pain, ultimately I'm grateful to them for actually seeing me, and I know that I'm very privileged and lucky that the pain that I was put through was for a reason, and that I'm no longer in that type of pain. And I know a lot of the other people that do condemn the medical community, it's because they're in chronic pain, and it's because that chronic pain is not being acknowledged, and I totally understand that, 100%. My mom and tons of my family members have chronic pain. But ultimately, I liked my dentist, I liked my oral surgeon. I don't want to condemn them, because they were just doing their jobs. I've got dentists that I could condemn, but I'd rather focus on the positive than on the negative. There's so much negativity in this collection already that I didn't want to bring in more.
Okay. We have a room full of writers here, some of whom you've had in class, some of whom are getting to know your work this afternoon. But do we have any questions from any of the folks in the room? Cause y'all be going through this, some of y'all be going through this very soon. Go ahead, Anya.
So you had talked about how at first conception you wrote this for yourself, but you had also talked about how secondary to that you hope that it helps other people feel seen or have an avenue into an experience that they've not seen before, but that it's something that can be tangible for other people as well. And we've talked a lot about how like we can't ultimately control our audience or how they feel, but if you had like in your ideal world, what would you hope an audience would take away from this when they read start to finish the manuscript about the nature of pain and its relationship with recovery? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's a really good question. Anya.
It is a very good
It's
question.
just a deep sigh. I was like, oh.
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned is pain is felt differently by every single person. Some people have extremely high pain tolerances. Some people have extremely low pain tolerances. Some people have chronic pain. Some people don't. Like, it's just, there's a vast world of bodies that do function properly and bodies that don't function properly. And, you know, ultimately, I kind of want, in terms of like recovery, this was you know, over a decade of surgeries and operations and stuff. And so even though, you know, I don't have that chronic pain, like I see people with chronic pain and I know all that, and I can't attest to what they're going through, but I can attest to having lengths of time where you just don't feel in control. And the only thing you can do is take the next step forward to recovery, and if recovery doesn't seem possible, take the next step forward to the next day that maybe you'll be in less pain. I'm hoping for the good days, but not waiting for them. 'Cause you know, after my hip graft surgery, I started work a month after I had that surgery. I started working as a barista, and recovering from that surgery was a pain, and it was worse than recovering from all of my other surgeries, but I got through it. And you know, one of just keeping on fighting is half the battle. Keeping the hopes up that you'll feel better one day is important. And you know, healing is more than just being like physically healed. It's emotional and mental healing too, and oftentimes those are the hardest parts of recovery is acknowledging the trauma that you went through and making steps towards healing from it, not forgetting that it happened, but not letting it define your life. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not, but.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah.
So I know that it didn't go like in chronological order, but I was wondering if you, because you hadn't really talked much about the accident itself like today, so I was wondering if you had any poems that like addressed it, or you just kind of were like kind of bouncing between like before and after without like kind of addressing it.
I do have one poem that talks about the accident itself in sort of
Page
a
53, budget cut, Red Riding Hood.
yes.
She's like, I know exactly the poem.
So, Budget Cut Red Riding Hood is one of the poems that I brought into Judy's workshop about the accident. And I think it's the only poem in here about the actual accident that I have, because I tried writing poem after poem about what happened, and I would either get too into the exposition, into the explaining, or too into the aftermath. Like, I've got a poem about the aftermath of it. I've got several. But Budget Cut Red Riding Hood is about it, and then Remember, which is in section 3 on page 68, is also about the accident.
Why don't you read Budget Cut?
Just more abstract. Yeah, okay. Budget Cut Red Riding Hood. I tiptoed through the darkness on my quest to the distant door in a room I kept black. Instinct danced my feet before I could direct them to tread careful and slow. I knew where I was going, the small door window across the choir room, a timid halo guiding the way. 15 feet from the end of my journey, the wolf snuck in behind me, his candy-sweet whispers twined through memories of the path, plucking puzzled pieces from me. I questioned my route, straight or veer aside. He convinced me the direct path was a minefield, explosions waiting for the slightest trip of the plate. His gentle voice ripe with worry culled my certainty. With fears for injuries, I moved to skirt the edge of the room. Towards safety, the risers were always kept clear. Too dark to see the wire of the wolf's lies weaving through my legs, wrapping my ankle. He gobbled me up when I tripped, coughed me out. His fangs flossed with red threads from my shredded cape, slammed me into a corner of a speaker, licked the blood oozing from my fractured mouth, tore my lips open more so he could steal a tooth as a souvenir before it could be swallowed, then shoved me screaming through the door, back into the fluorescent hallway lights, glaring off the cracked linoleum floors, glistening with small pools of blood, crimson against white speckled brown.
Mm. Yeah, I don't want that to happen to me.
I don't want it to happen to any of y'all. Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah. So at this time,
Wait, I want to request a poem.
Okay, request a poem.
Request all the poems, Allison. That's not fair.
Okay.
Anatomy of a Fetal Pig, page 38. It has one of those endings that lands that I really liked, but I also just liked it.
I enjoyed writing that poem, and I was inspired to write this poem by Augustus bringing in a dissecting poem into Allison's workshop last semester, and then we got to talking about dissections that we'd all done.
Everybody's got a dissection
and
memory. Why did they make us do this?
And so then I was like, oh, I could bring that in to this collection. So that's how the Anatomy of a Fetal Pig came into discovery. Mrs. Bell tells us to be respectful, so I steal the scalpel from teenage hands, clutch it in my grip. I agree to serial killer accusations. I've known how it feels to be under the knife. This animal never lived, never breathed air. The air I've always known has been stale, iron-filled, like evaporated blood. I make the first incisions, cut open her larynx. I want to thread her vocal cords through a needle's eye, sew the mouths of my class shut, cut open their vocal cords, slash them so crude words can't emit sound. I move on instead, pull out her heart, gently set it down. Don't crush it. Don't let her blood flow like my own has, waterfall of liquid roses.
It's such a pretty poem for such a horrific thing. Yes, you can. So at this time, any final words for you about this project, your time here at SIU, what you plan to do in the future? What's happening, girl? Where are you going?
I'm very grateful for my time at SIU. It has been everything that I hoped it would be. I've learned so much while I was here, and
Now, are you thinking of the PhD, or is this it? This is like, I've had enough graduate school.
I might do the PhD in a couple of years,
Mhm.
because I went straight from undergrad into grad school, and so part of me is like, I need a break. I need to just work for a little while and figure out, like, one of the reasons why I came to grad school was because I was afraid that once I didn't have to write creatively for a class, I wouldn't write.
This is true. This is true.
So I came to grad school to try and force me to write more and to challenge myself, and so now I'm wanting to go out and get a regular 9 to 5 that has hours and a routine, and I can keep the work at the work as much as possible, and so then when I go home I can have dedicated time to write and to relax and just to breathe. And then in a couple of years I might apply to PhD programs. I think I would like to apply to a PhD program. I eventually would like to have a doctorate to my name. But for right now, I'm happy with my MFA, and maybe in the future I'll apply for an MFA in fiction or something like that. But right now it's just get out, get a job, hopefully submit more of my things, because that's one of the things I'm really bad at is
That's one of the
submitting
things I've nagged you about, like, get these poems out into the world, get, other
I've only
eyes on
done
them.
one submission so far, so during spring break I'll be better at that, I promise.
And in the most immediate future, you are moving to
Clarksville,
Tennessee.
Yep, to live with my mom and my sister.
Which is I know there's a university there, Austin P. I'm not sure. I think I used to know people who were teaching creative writing there. I'm not sure what sort of, but Nashville's not too far.
Not too far. It's about an hour away.
What's important is whether you go on for a MFA in another genre or you go on for a PhD, is to keep in touch with some sort of community, even if you end up founding a writers group yourself, which I can totally see you doing actually, that lots of people, once they leave graduate school, it isn't how well you did with the thesis, it's what you do with the thesis afterward, Are you going to keep pushing it? And the best example I can think of, and I've told them this, and I've told other people about Avery Guess, who did an MFA here, but took a year off before going into a PhD program, applied to every single writer's colony, writer's residency, everything they could think of, and sort of strung together a whole year off. And that's how their first book came to be, because time, when you're in graduate school, it seems like, everything's filled up. But there's a whole lot of time we don't account for, where we're just hanging out with people, where we're shooting the shit in our offices and things like that. And that's what disappears once you're in the 9 to 5 working world, that kind of camaraderie, that kind of other people think it's important to write poetry. So whatever you do, find a community. Of course, you're going to keep in touch with us.
Yes, I will. It is my goal, though, to get this published so I can send signed copies to my dentist and oral surgeon.
That is a very good
Like,
aim.
here you guys.
So, and we know in order to make that happen, you have to send out like the individual packets of poems.
I know.
Yeah. So, what we'll do at this point is ask you to leave the room. We will ask the assembled to leave, and we will have a little discussion, and give us, 3 minutes, 4 minutes,
Okay.
and then we'll ask you to come back in.
You guys need to pause the recording.
Should we pause the recording?
I have no idea how to do that.
That's okay.
We should indeed
That
pause.
is the Kayla thing, but I'm afraid if I stop it.
You can just stop the live stream. It'll be fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Just stop the live stream. And then you can stop the recording.